Right, good morning everybody. This is quite a strange, we went through the strange situation 6 to 8 months ago where we went all virtual. Now we're in the strange situation of going back to live meetings, which is quite interesting because we're trying to do social spacing and make sure we get the best meeting possible, both for ourselves and the public. So welcome to all of you under this new normal. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Obviously everyone knows where the loos are and everything else, but with microphones, when you use your microphone, could you speak towards it because they're directional? And could you also please switch it off when you finish speaking, because there's only 2 microphones, I think, that work at any one time. With all that in mind, we'll start the meeting properly. Agenda item number 1 is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Yeah, good morning, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Waring.
Thank you. And item number 2, do we have any declarations of interest in accordance with Standing Order 16.2? Members? No interests declared. And item number 4, therefore, is the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981.
Chair, just forgive me, you've skipped over the minutes.
Oh, apologies. That's why we have a secretary. We've got to move them. Seconded. Okay, so the minutes have been moved. Thank you, Zach, for pointing that out. And we'll move on to item number 4, which is Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, application to upgrade Public Bridleway 29, Bradnop and Cowdrey to a restricted byway. And Claire, are you going to do the presentation? David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the panel. First of all, my recommendation is that the evidence submitted by the applicant, at Appendix A, is not sufficient to show that a restricted byway subsists along the route marked B to C along Public Bridleway 29, Bradnop and Cawdrey, and shown on the attached plan at Appendix B. Further, my recommendation is that an order should not be made to upgrade the right-of-way shown, marked B to C, on the plan attached to Appendix B to the definitive map and statement of public rights-of-way for the district of Staffordshire Moorlands. If we could move down to Part A4, this is quite important. This application, which is referenced LW602G, was submitted at approximately the same time and by the same applicant as another application, reference LW604G. The 2 applications are to be considered together, that is today, as they form a linking route, or they join, one being a public footpath currently and one being a public bridleway. The claim is for both to be upgraded to the status of restricted byway. The 2 application routes are shown on the plan attached at Appendix B. The subject of this application being marked B to C, and the subject of the other application being marked A to B. This clearly shows the routes linking at point B and places each application within the context of the other. Turning to the evidence submitted by the applicant, in support of the application, Mr. Brian Smith, on behalf of the Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleways Group, submitted a transcript of the enclosure award of Bradnop and Woncott, dated 1769. A copy of the transcript can be found at Appendix C. The applicant has also submitted a copy of Smith's map, dated 1801. A copy of this is attached at Appendix D. Evidence discovered by the council consisted of parish survey cards for both routes, and the original or the originating document for the transcript that was provided from the enclosure award of 1869. I should point out here that we only have the transcript and we don't have a map or plan that shows the routes in question. Evidence submitted by the landowners, we had two landowners who were identified by the applicant, a Mr. M. Barlow and a Mr. E.C. Hine. And these evidence forms can be found at Appendix G. We go to the comments on the evidence at point 15. In this case, it is not the existence of a public right-of-way that is brought into question, as it already has the status as a public bridleway. The claim is that the route has higher rights and that these rights are consistent with those of a restricted byway. The evidence depends heavily upon the enclosure transcript, and so the probity of this evidence needs to be significant and sufficient for the claim to be successful. The transcript forms part of the enclosure award that came about through the Enclosure Act. I'll briefly mention a bit about the Enclosure Act as background information. The Enclosure Act, it was designed to enclose the old commons, the manorial wastelands, basically to make them more profitable for the bigger landowners, on whose behalf they were often promoted. The local Enclosure Act empowered an enclosure commissioner to survey and divide up the land, allotting it to named individuals, including the setting out of highways, which is obviously critical to our questions and matters today. After all the procedures have been completed, the Commissioner would issue the final award and accompanying map. And again, we have the transcript, we have a part of a map, but the areas in question that we are interested in are not visible on that map. And we'll come to that a little bit later. Turning to point 23, it appears that the Commissioners were empowered to act in this respect. This information was fairly difficult to sort of ascertain from the original document. We did look at this. Your officers went to the Records Office. We found the originating document for both the transcript and for the authorities that were obviously given to the Commissioners. It's sparse, but we accept that it does give them and grant them this right. And I've put in there what it actually says. From what we can decipher, a lot of it is illegible, but it says allotting the said Commissioners to preparing and enforcing this one award. For us as your officers, we were happy to accept that as permissions granted. Point 24, the transcript describes the route alleged to be the claim route, and this is reproduced in full as it is the primary evidence submitted for the claim. The route in the award is described as such. So I've given there at point 25 a full actual quote, if you like, of what's said in the actual enclosure award for 1769. I won't read the whole transcript there. What I will say is that we did compare this to the written copy that was sent in by the applicant, and it did match, it did correspond. There were a couple of words that were mistranslated, but there was nothing fatal to this claim, to this matter in that respect. If we turn to point 28, and the following points beyond, we see a description and an exposition of the enclosure award evidence that we have. And all I will say to that in summation is that we have one half of what is normally considered to be very good, if not definitive evidence in a case of this type. We have the transcript, we have the written part of the award, but we do not have the map. So the routes are not shown on the map. And I think it's important to bear this in mind because we're considering this on the balance of probabilities, which is the higher legal test, as this is an upgrade. If we turn the page, the other piece of evidence provided by the applicant was Smith's map dated 1801. Again, I've given an exposition there of these county series maps that some predate 1769, some are post-dated 1769. All of these maps are not what we would say heavily weighted maps when it comes to the legal perspective and the legal question that we've got before us. These maps were drawn up to show, as the Ordnance Survey maps, a physical feature on the ground, and they bear no relation to the rights that may or may not be ascribed to any particular route. They just show what's on the ground. Beyond that, we have very limited weight that we can apply or subscribe to them. So the 1801 map by Smith, really I think we can fairly discount as good evidence. It may have been supporting evidence had we had further evidence, we don't, or wider evidence. As it is, we only have two pieces, the enclosure transcript and the 1801 map. Council officers then pursued the matter further and dug out the old parish survey card. Now, the parish survey cards came about after the 1949 Act to actually standardise and record rights of way across Britain on a definitive map and a definitive statement. Now, the acronym CRF was often used, or CRB, both were used, on the parish survey cards to indicate a route that had foot use, horse use, and possibly hire use, possibly vehicular use. Now, on its own, the acronym CRF on a parish survey card may be suggestive of hire rights, but it's not conclusive of hire rights. And this is a problem that we're faced with today with this application and the following application. The CRF acronym, although suggestive that there may have been use of the route by vehicles in the past at some distant point, it is not enough on the balance of probabilities when taken together with the enclosure award of 1769 transcript minus the map and the 1801 Smith map. It's not enough to tip the scales on the balance of probability. So again, it's evidence, but it's not significant enough evidence. Turning the page, I mention here the overall detail in the enclosure award being limited, again, as a sort of summation to the earlier points, and the fact that there are no additional details regarding widths or boundaries of the route. Now, this is quite important to the claim, to the application, because routes that were considered to have vehicular rights or use by wagons or carts and carriages would, more probably than not, have had a width expressed, stated, and made out in the enclosure award. I do accept that this is an early award, 1769, and as time passed, these details were more likely to be recorded, but we don't have the evidence. And again, without the evidence of the map, without the evidence of the measurements, then we are struggling on the balance of probability to tip those scales. In summation, at point 56, we have only one half of what is normally taken to be a good piece of evidence, and that half is open to interpretation. It is supported by two further pieces of evidence of limited legal weight. But again, the application is based on the balance of probabilities, the higher test, requiring a greater level of probity to succeed. Before we move to the conclusion, I wonder if I could ask members to turn to the responses to the draft report sheet, which was included as an addendum, a rather late addendum to this matter. Here, it is a separate addendum. It was addended to the report, I think, several days after it was uploaded online. It should be referenced under addendum. There you will find a heading responses to draft report. These responses were from all parties that were consulted, and I've given them in full because the ones at point 4 given by the applicant, Julie Turner, who also works alongside Brian Smith, the original applicant, well, the applicant. They work together on the Staffordshire Moorlands and Bridleways group. Julie Turner actually being the rights of way officer for that group. She has submitted lengthy comments, which I've said we will go through, the relevant ones and the salient ones, in a few minutes. First of all, I think it's important to say that the relevant councillor for the area, Councillor Jill Heath, endorsed all recommendations, and that goes for both reports. And the parish council also, I spoke to them for Bradnop, and they had no objections and seemed fairly happy with the recommendations. Turning to point 4, and Julie Turner, again, the rights of way officer for the Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleways group, the applicant, I've identified there with numbers, italics 1 to, I think it goes to about 12, numerous comments that she supplied in response to my report. Very quickly, we'll go through the most important ones. She's put a lot of work into this, and I think, we owe this to her. There's a lot of knowledge here, and I think, we will give it the full attention it deserves. Point 1, Julie Turner, on behalf of the group, further sent me additional evidence of an 1837 Ordnance Survey map. Now, we have an Ordnance Survey map, and that appears to show the line of the route. Problem we have is that Ordnance Survey only record, as do the county series maps, a physical route on the ground. It bears no relation to the legal status of any route. So although we received this further submission, nothing turns on this. If we look at point 2, Julie Turner further contends other Ordnance Survey maps that show the route post-1837 as a series. Again, the fact that we have many of these over different years adds nothing to this claim. Point 3, we have the OS map for 1837, again referred to, but the problem is we have a 70-year gap from 1769, so that even if the OS map of 1837 was shown to be the same, and follow the same route as the 1769 map, there's a 70-year gap for which we've got no evidence, or at least no evidence before us. Point 4 refers to the enclosure award transcript and the fact that the OS maps appear to show identical routes. The problem again we have here is there's a fair amount of assumption and supposition in this, and conjecture, in that whether they do indeed show the same thing. We have a description, but we do not have the plan. If we had the plan, we could compare the two together. And the difference between knowing a fact and proving a fact is one of the main reasons we are considering this today. Point 5, I make a point there about putting these details to panel. Point 6, she refers to a perceived error in the reports in that although we refer to the CRF acronym on the parish survey cards, the fact that these paths both subsequently became RUPs, that's roads used as public paths, was not included in the report. In fact, the opposite. In my report, the evidence was not there before me to say that these two routes were RUPs. So without the evidence, I couldn't confirm they were. Since that time, we've checked historical records of the statement, so earlier records of the statement, and we can confirm both routes were in fact RUPs. Although, again, nothing turns on this, because when we find a RUP status in any application, the first course of redress is to go and study the parish survey card, which is the originating document for that RUP status. We did this in some detail, as is shown in the report. And again, on that card, there was very little to say anything about any vehicular rights or rights for carriages or any allusion at all on that parish survey card to say that this was a carriageway or carriage road. Point 7, we talk here about the RUPs a little bit, and Julie Turner asked me to include within the report, which I did as a further addendum appendix, if you like, an exposition of what RUPs are. So members will have that in the pack as well, but again, nothing really turns on this. We've got and considered the parish survey cards, and I'm happy that what they show adds nothing to what any further investigation into the RUP status would have shown. I think the two are very contemporaneous with each other. Point 8, Julie then valiantly went out and took photographs of the route to ascertain, really in response to my question of the measurements or the lack of measurements in the enclosure award. She went out, photographed the route, and we have a number of photographs here. I think there are about 11 photographs, and they show the route as it is today. These photographs are held as evidence to suggest that this route was something more than a footpath or a bridle road, and the nature of it on the ground is held up to suggest that, yes, this is indeed a carriageway. The problem again we have is that the physical description on the ground bears no relation to the legal status of the route. So even though we have a route that may, in all appearances, seem to be a carriageway, legally, this holds no weight for the matter in hand. The pictures are there, the pictures are welcome. There is also reference to old stone walls, which would give some indication of possible bounds that are alluded to have been there possibly for centuries. Again, we cannot prove this is the case. It may in fact be the case, but we need the evidence to say this is so, and we do not have it. All we have is a physical picture of what is on the ground today. So again, on balance, we cannot accept this as evidence for a restricted byway status. Turning to point 9, again from Julie Turner, the applicant, on behalf of the applicant, there are more photographs showing the ends of the route. Again, she highlights here the transcript from the 1769 award, selecting various wording, but again, there's nothing in there that says and tells us, as your officers, that there are vehicle rights, or were vehicle rights, on this route. There's a further description that's given by Julie Turner, and it's quite a detailed description that goes on to state where the route was, explaining that Ashenhurst Hall was there, and this may have been a carriage road. Again, there's a lot of supposition, a lot of guesswork. We don't know. Probably it did serve Ashenhurst Hall, but we need to prove that, and we can't prove that because the evidence isn't before us or hasn't survived. Julie also sent a copy of Yates's map of 1798, which was enlarged, and produced, as she highlights, only 29 years after the enclosure award. Again, it's probably about as near as we can get with a series map, but again, it is a county series map, and all it shows is physical evidence of the route on the ground. There are various other parts here, which I won't go into, we've covered in the report, but again, there's a case, or an attempt to build a very strong case to say, you know, this is a restricted byway. Nothing here, nothing turns on any of these points. In conclusion, the Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleway Group consider that the evidence submitted is sufficient to prove on balance of probability that Bridleway 29 should be upgraded to restricted byway. And they cite 4 points for this belief. Point 1 is the enclosure award refers to the route being a public horse, carriage and drift road. And they say it is incorrect to ignore the word carriage. This is a point really of interpretation, and for us to actually accept this as enough, sufficient to change the recommendation, it falls short. Point 2, the route is clearly described in the enclosure award as a direct route from the Turnpike Road along Ashenhurst Road to Ashenhurst. Again, there's some supposition here. We can see the route, we can see the line of the route, but it doesn't give us any indication of the rights along that route. It only gives us the layout of the route as it is on the ground. Julie also states that the route today is 30 feet wide, but again, if it's 30 feet wide today, we can't confirm this was the case in 1769. It may have been widened at any point after 1769. Even if it was the case, it's not mentioned in the enclosure award, and because it isn't mentioned, we cannot hold it up as good evidence on the balance of probabilities. Okay, if we turn now back to the report and to the conclusion, in light of the evidence as set out above, it is your officer's opinion that the evidence does not show that a public right-of-way subsists and that the state is a restricted byway. It is the opinion of officers that the County Council should not make a modification order to upgrade the route, which is the subject of this application, to a restricted byway on the definitive map and statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to accept any comments.
Thank you, David. That's a very good report and quite interesting, the conclusions and the legal implications on it. Just for clarification for me, you did mention Jill Heath, who's the local member, and you did mention the local parish council. Could you just again say what their recommendations were?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Heath endorses all recommendations across both reports. I say the two reports are linked, as we'll see in the second one. And the parish council they used the word very happy with what was in the reports.
So they support your recommendation?
Yes, they do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Members have David.
Chairman, can I just clarify some of the silly points, really? The photographs show usage by twin-wheel vehicles, which could be farm vehicles, they could be all sorts of vehicles, we don't know. So there is evidence of current usage, but not evidence of its legal status. So we find ourselves in a situation where we could, if we follow the recommendation, refuse the application, and so the track has no status, but is still in usage as if it had, which seems a bit of an oddity from my point of view. I mean, presumably, if it was continued to be used by vehicles, then there would be no enforcement. Nobody's going to stop them doing that. And I just wonder where we as a committee stand. I can fully understand your recommendations, and on the face of that, then I see the committee has little choice but to accept your recommendations. I just look at the silliness of what we may find ourselves in and where we stand over that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to that point. It may be that there are private routes of access along that road. We're talking about here public right of way. So it would be the public's right to use vehicles along that route, non-motor vehicles, of course, along that route. There may exist currently private rights to access farms and other properties. Those we don't consider, these are separate to the public right of way.
What we're saying is that the current users are very probably acceptable, but if we were to not accept the report, it would in fact open it up to the public to use at will, which is presumably not what we're looking to do.
Yes, basically that would be the case, at least by non-motor propelled vehicles.
Paul Snape.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first thank David for the excellence of the report? And in case she's watching, can I also thank Miss Turner for all the assistance she's given us, the photographs and all the research she's done in this matter. But at the end of the day, we're looking at the balance of probabilities, the 51% rule, and I don't really feel that's made out. If we look through the document, I mean, the former Master of Rolls, Lord Denning, actually says about the Smith's map and the size of those, so you can't do any reading from that, really. It doesn't make it out. And if we look at the parish cards, it doesn't say what it was. So really, if we take the evidence, and as the government keeps talking about, we've got to go with the data, the evidence, I really feel on this case, even though it may be used as a more restricted one, we've got to go with the evidence. So on this occasion, unless there's any other comments from any of the councillors, I will be proposing that we go with officer's recommendation.
Thank you. We've got a proposal from Councillor Snape that we follow the officer's recommendations, seconded by David Smith. Are we all in favour of that? Yeah, unanimous. Thank you very much for your... And we'll move on to item number 5, which is, again, Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, application to upgrade public footpath 30 Bradnop and Cawdry to a restricted byway. Okay, do you want to carry on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the panel. I'll move straight on to the recommendation in this report, which again is linked to the previous report, and this can be demonstrated by looking at the Appendix B, which is the plan, and it shows both the previous report and this report's way marked on it A, B and B to C. Hence, the two are being considered together. The recommendation in this, based on the evidence at Appendix A, we believe is not sufficient to show that a restricted byway subsists along the route marked A to B, along public footpath 30, Bradnop and Cawdry, and shown on the attached plan at Appendix B, and that an order should not be made to upgrade the right-of-way to a restricted byway shown, marked A to B, on the plan attached at Appendix B, to the definitive map and statement of public rights-of-way for the district of Staffordshire Moorlands. And that the evidence submitted by the applicant at Appendix A is sufficient, however, to show that a public bridleway subsists along the route, marked A to B, along public footpath 30, Bradnop and Cawdry, and shown on the attached plan at Appendix B. And our recommendation is that an order should be made to upgrade the right-of-way to a public bridleway, shown, marked A to B, on the plan attached at Appendix B, to the definitive map and statement of public rights-of-way for the district of Staffordshire Moorlands. If we can move now down to Part A2, this is an application to consider what we have attached to Appendix A in the application, again from Mr. Brian Smith, on behalf of the Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleways Group, for an order to modify the definitive map. And this was to upgrade public footpath 30 to a restricted byway, as was the case in the previous application. Point 3, to decide and having regard to and having considered the application and all the available evidence, and after applying the relevant legal tests, whether to accept or reject the application. We've already covered point 4 in the previous report, in that these two applications are linked. But point 5, the lines of the two application routes are shown on the plan at Appendix B. And if that could just be, if members could just turn to that and look at those plans and those routes, then I think the two reports become more clear. And I think my recommendation as well becomes more sort of logical. Evidence submitted by the applicant. In support of the application, the applicant, Mr. Brian Smith, has submitted a transcript of the enclosure award of Bradnop and Woncott dated 1769. Again, we've got a written copy from an enclosure award, but we haven't got a plan and we haven't got a map. So we've got one half of what's normally considered to be good evidence. The applicant also submitted a copy of Smith's map dated 1817 and a copy of Greenwood's map dated 1818 to 1819, and a copy of these are attached to Appendix D. The applicant has also submitted a copy of the map of maintainable roads from the County Highways Department, and a copy of this is attached to Appendix E. Your officers also discovered the parish survey card attached to Appendix F, as in the previous report, and we found the originating document in the County Records Office from which the written copied transcript was taken. All these pieces of evidence are attached to the report. 4 landowners were identified and 3 of them returned landowner responses. However, the information in those responses, on that information with this application, nothing turns. Much of it being opinion-based. If I can take you to point 17 and begin the comments on the evidence, in this case, as it was in the previous case, it is not the existence of a public right-of-way that is brought into question, as it already has the status of a public footpath. The claim is that the route has higher rights and that these rights are consistent with a restricted byway. The evidence depends heavily upon the enclosure transcript, and so the probity of this evidence needs to be significant and sufficient in order for the claim to be successful. I go on to talk about the enclosure award that we've already covered in the previous report. If I can take you down to point 27, the applicant gives again the transcript, as we can see there, referring to the route as a public horse, carriage and drift road. I won't read the full excerpt there, but again, we have the same wording, public horse, carriage and drift road. I make a point at 28 in that the terms public and private, when viewed in these old enclosure awards, may not refer to status, it may refer to maintenance. It may be that one right on the route was maintained by somebody and the status was public of another ride. It varies. The picture is variable. At point 30, the fact set out in an enclosure award carries significant evidential weight, and it has been determined by the courts to be conclusive evidence in respect of public highways, in the absence of later legal evidence such as quarter session orders. This is very pertinent to this application, because if the enclosure award, complete with its map, and both those pieces of evidence had supported each other with full clarity, then yes, possibly on the balance of probabilities, there would be more of a case to answer. However, it's only, again, one half of the piece of evidence. Indeed, at point 32, the whole section relating to the claim route has either never been drawn up or had faded to the point where it was no longer visible. Point 33, we turn to the enclosure plan discovered by the council, and viewing it alongside the written transcript, it can be seen by using the points of reference that the route referred to is numbered 93 on the plan. Now, this is where this report and this transcript differ from the previous report, in that the description in the award there was not clear. We did not have absolute clarity. In this report and in this application, we have 3 good points of reference in the description from which we can ascertain with relative certainty that the route in question is the same as the route in the enclosure award. The transcript, however, gives us some indication of the line of the route at the time of enclosure, more particularly giving Apesford Road as a key point of reference. We have Apesford Road, Ashenhurst, and I believe one other point of reference called Revenge Road, which taken together suggests that this is most probably, more probably than not, the route that was mentioned in the enclosure award. At point 42, we have a starting point, a main road, Apesford Road. We have an end point, Ashenhurst, and we have a middle section running along Revenge Road. Together, these 3 indicators strongly suggest the route in the enclosure award is consistent with public footpath 30 as it is today on the ground. At point 45, we refer to the applicant, in addition, submitting a copy of Smith's map, dated 1817. Again, we've covered this in the previous report relating to the connecting path, and these maps do not carry sufficient legal weight to be taken as good evidence on a case where the balance of probability is the legal test. The applicant also submitted a copy of Greenwood's map, dated 1818. And again, we have 2 of them, 1817, 1818, but again, their legal value is limited. They're very good as supporting evidence if we've got significant other evidence, but in this case, we don't. It's tentative. At point 48, the courts have considered old maps and found, where they do show routes, even though they're on very small scale, they can be suggestive of high rights on a footpath. We'll make that point there. I think this point was raised previously, but we would need further evidence to support this. On its own, it's not enough. We give a legal case at the bottom there to support that. At point 50, we turn to the landowner response forms, and again, within these, nothing really turns on the application. Again, much is opinion-based. At point 45, the parish survey card of 1951 again records the route with the acronym CRF, which suggests at some point in the distant past there may have been rights higher, or at least bridleway rights, but rights higher than a bridleway, perhaps with vehicular use. However, the parish survey card, as in the case of the last report, does not offer any further exposition or description of this on the card itself. So again, we're very much in the dark on this. If there had been some note on the parish survey card, perhaps we may have had more of a case to answer. Lastly, point 61, we have a map of maintainable roads from the County Highways Department, although again, nothing turns on this. The County Highways Department's maintainable roads, if we have a route shown here, then all it says is that this route is maintainable by the council. It doesn't offer any further explanation or confirmation of its legal status or the rights upon it. It's only showing, confirming that it is a road or route or whatever that's maintained at the council, by the council. So again, that piece of evidence is not sufficient on a test where the balance of probability is the test that we are employing. At point 64, part section of the aforesaid public bridleway 29 joins the route is indeed recorded as a publicly maintainable road. This is just to clarify the point in the previous plan. But again, nothing turns on this. At point 66, in summation, the evidence from the enclosure award transcript appears to suggest the route number 93 Revedge Road is the same as the route of public footpath 30, the subject of the claim. If we go down now to the final summation at the bottom, when all the evidence is taken together, we don't have enough to say that we have a restricted byway. However, we believe, based on the CRF acronym on the parish survey card and on the description in the enclosure award, tentative as it is, that this route may have had bridleway rights. And the conclusion would be for this report is that it's insufficient to make an order to upgrade to a restricted byway, but to decide that we accept the alternative to upgrade to a public bridleway. So that would be your officer's recommendation, that we reject the application, but we accept the alternative datus and upgrade the route to a public bridleway. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, David. Again, very good report, very inclusive. So we have the recommendation in front of us. Is there any points that members want to make before we talk about it? Okay. Can I have a proposal?
Okay, item 5. I'll go along with officer's recommendation. The first, insufficient evidence for restricted byway. Order should not be made. Evidence of a bridleway. Are we going to put any width limit on that, or maximum width on that, or just keep it as an open bridleway?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The minimum width would be recommended to be 3 metres, although I would recommend that the maximum width is not included, is left open because the route has variable widths along on the ground. So I think we leave the maximum width open.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then 4, we make that order. And that's my proposal.
Okay, we've got a proposal by Councillor Stape, seconded by Councillor Smith. Are we agreed? Yeah, unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Sorry. We'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. Application to upgrade public footpath 14 Cheadle to a restricted byway. Is that David in or?
It's myself this time.
Claire, thank you very much.
Yes, good morning members. This matter concerns an application to upgrade a footpath which is named as Cheadle 14 to a restricted byway status. The line of the public footpath that is subject to this application is shown highlighted and marked A to B on the plan, which is attached to Appendix B. The applicant has submitted in support of their application evidence of an enclosure award and a map dated 1831. As we have already heard this morning, enclosure awards were designed to enclose old commons, manorial waste and smaller holdings in order to increase agricultural productivity. This included setting out of highways. This particular enclosure award was dated 1831, and again, as we have heard this morning, the General Act, which was created in 1801, set out standardised clauses which were then used in private and local acts. Unfortunately, in this instance, only an extract of the award has been provided and not the full award, and also the preamble to the award has not been provided, and therefore it's not exactly clear what powers the Commissioners had. And I'll go on to explain the award itself and specifically the extract that's been provided. The map with the enclosure award shows the alleged route marked as Teen Road. The route connects the carriageway to the northeast, which is not named. The route then runs in a southerly direction through what appears to be fields and enclosures, and the route is separate from adjacent land holdings, and it runs across plots 2, 7, 8, 11 and 12 and alongside old enclosure. The route then connects to Alton Turnpike Road to the south. The title of the award is Public Carriage, Drift and Foot Roads 30 feet wide, and the alleged route is referred under this section as Teen Road on Plan 1. Teen Road starts in the south and continues in a northerly direction. It's clearly a long route and it connects and crosses over other routes. The first part of the award does not relate to the alleged route, even though it does refer to Teen Road. As I've said, Teen Road clearly is a very long route, and the alleged route only covers the very northern part of this route after it has connected with Alton Turnpike Road. The award goes on to state, and out of the said Cheadle and Alton Turnpike Road, about an equal distance between the said Counslow Tollgate and Greenman Inn, and continuing nearly in a northwardly direction to and near to a certain place called the Old Furnace, and which the said road leaves towards Oakermore. This is the part of the passage that specifically refers to the alleged route. In the award, the alleged route falls under the section, as I have said, Public Carriage, Drift and Foot Roads. From the map, the alleged route forms part of Teen Road, and it is clearly separate from these adjacent land holdings. However, there's nothing on the map to indicate the nature of any rights over this alleged route. There is nothing to differentiate between the said public carriage, drift and foot roads on the map. As the award outlines the direction the route takes and states specifically public carriage, drift and foot roads, it's highly supportive that the route does have a public status. It is shown as separate from adjacent land holdings and therefore it's likely to be a public carriageway. However, there's nothing in the text of the award to indicate the specific status of Teen Road. It merely refers to it as continuing from Alton Turnpike Road, and there's nothing to identify the status of Alton Turnpike Road, other than that it's clearly a road and again it is separate from adjacent land holdings. There's nothing in the award to indicate who had responsibility for the maintenance of this route. Usually the award would specify whether it was the surveyor of highways or an individual landowner. In this case it is not clear. Teen Road then continues in this southerly direction, and nowhere in the award does it refer to the nature of any rights over any part of Teen Road. Although it's clear that the route is a road and therefore more likely to have rights over it which are higher than a footpath, there is nothing to indicate the exact rights over this, and whether or not this would have included the rights for non-mechanically propelled vehicles to use the route. It's likely the time the award was made and the map was created, and the fact that the route is identified as a road, that carts and carriages may well have used the route in the 1830s, but there's again nothing to make this clear, and therefore nothing to implicitly suggest that the route should be reclassified as a restricted byway. Following the circulation of the report, comments were received from Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleways Group, which is the applicant, enclosing further documents, and those are attached to Appendix D. Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleways Group state that the Cheadle Enclosure Award of 1831 lists the alleged route, Teen Road, under the heading Public Carriage, Drift and Foot Roads 30 feet wide, and they argue that there is nothing to distinguish the type of road Teen Road falls under, and that is because it is all three types of road. They refer to the Enclosure Consolidation Act of 1801, which states that 30 foot wide is the minimum width for a public carriage road, and as this is the heading teen road falls under, it must therefore be a public carriage road. Conversely, it could be argued that the commissioners could have distinguished the routes specifically at the time, and as I will go on to explain, the routes that are then listed under that larger heading then are then referred to as another road and another road. They're not specifically referring to them as any of those designations. The Staffordshire Moorlands Bridleways Group have also submitted several ordnance survey maps which show the alleged route set out in the same manner as the enclosure award, depicts the alleged route as a road. They've also provided up-to-date photographs of the alleged route which state that they show the route has a stone surface on part of the route and showing old stone tracks on both sides with ruts where metal-rimmed carriages would have run. Your officers have examined this additional documentation and have provided by the applicants, and a copy of the reply that we've sent is at Appendix E. Your officers have also reviewed a full copy of the award, and it is not clear that the alleged route Team Road does fall into the category of all three types of road and therefore was used by vehicles. The first route referred to under this section is named as Winnowdale Road, and it specifically refers to this as public carriage, drift and foot roads after that initial large heading. The remaining routes under that section are just referred to as another road. In relation to the Ordnance Survey maps, the purpose of these maps was just to show physical features on the ground, and they are only evidence of a right-of-way, only evidence on the ground at the date of that survey. These maps do not categorise the rights-of-way, and they don't show the status of the routes. Your officers have also reviewed parish survey cards for the area that were completed as part of the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act 1949, Survey of Rights-of-Way. The survey card records the alleged route as path number 14 and with the path symbol FP, which denotes that it is a footpath. It records that on no known grounds for a footpath being public, the first half of this footpath went specifically through strictly private grounds belonging to the old seat of the Earl of Shrewsbury. There is no mention of the route being used by vehicles or being used in any other way other than as a footpath. In addition, in conclusion, in relation to that additional evidence, it's your officer's opinion that this further evidence doesn't alter the conclusions of the report. Additional evidence was submitted by the applicant at 10:21 yesterday evening, which was received this morning. The additional evidence stated, it was an attachment to the email, and it stated that they were attaching further evidence, which was a Cheadle above part quarter tithe map from 1842, which shows the route Cheadle footpath 14 coloured sienna, and they state that it's the same manner as all the other roads in the locality. Unfortunately, due to the late submission of this evidence, we've not been able to actually open the document, so we can't actually see the map itself. I do believe we have responded to the applicant, haven't we, and asked them if, stating that we're not able to open it.
Yes, the applicant was emailed this morning just confirming the difficulties with opening the attachment.
Lovely. So unfortunately we're not able to consider that document because obviously we're not able to open it. I mean, the only comment I can make in relation to tithe maps is that it will just show the route on a map. It's not going to tell you the status, so it's not going to have any additional weight to the enclosure award that's been provided. So therefore, in conclusion, the question here is not whether footpath 14 is a public highway because it already has a status of footpath. It is just purely the nature of the rights over that route, the public rights. In order to overturn the current designation, we must be able to satisfy the test of the balance of probabilities. So with regard to the status of the route, the burden is on the applicant to show that the balance of probabilities that it is more likely than not that the definitive map and statement is wrong. In light of the evidence above, it's therefore your opinion of your officers that based on the balance of probabilities that it is subject to this application is more likely than not it is a public footpath, and therefore the recommendation is that the County Council should not make a modification order to upgrade the route to a restricted byway. It is of course open to the panel to make a decision to upgrade the route to that of bridleway status, which is obviously higher than footpath rights, but I will leave that for your deliberations.
Could I, as chair, just I wasn't aware of the late submission, and it is a very late submission. 2 or 3 hours before a meeting, it doesn't seem sensible to me. If it was a tithe map that they found that's been found by members of the public, it does seem strange that it's been put in at the very last minute. Could you again just qualify that and say that normally with tithe maps they don't actually confirm the status of a route?
Yeah, they don't usually have that designation on the tithe map. It would be supporting evidence if we had really good evidence to show in the other evidence that have been provided. In this instance, it's really difficult. Obviously, they've stated that it is coloured, and it is coloured the same as other routes on the map, but that wouldn't suggest that it was either a footpath or a bridleway or even a restricted byway. It just wouldn't have that designation on normally.
And just one final one for clarification for members. The recommendation to upgrade this footpath to a bridleway is not it's not been made by officers, but it's an option that we've got as councillors, and that option has been ratified by has it been ratified by the local member or not, or the parish council?
I don't believe there's been any comments from the local member. In relation, obviously, it's always an option to, from discovery of evidence, if we find that if we can say that it does have higher rights than a footpath, potentially the enclosure award could suggest that there are higher rights than a footpath. The application specifically is for a restricted byway, which doesn't satisfy the test, but that is an option available to you to make it a bridleway.
And finally, from the chair, in terms of the recommendation which doesn't include the bridleway, if we as a panel decide to go down that route, how safe would that decision be?
That's a good question. I think it would just be it would be a decision for yourselves if you're happy that the evidence showed that the bridleway did exist. It's just purely an option in terms of the levels of the rights of the route. Footpath, bridleway, restricted byway. It is the one that is in between. It is just purely an option, like I say, for the panel.
Can I suggest that or ask the question, if we just almost as a whim decide to take that option of creating a bridleway, will that impinge on decisions in the future or decisions in the past that we've made as a Crow panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My interpretation of this, and I don't know whether Claire agrees, is that each application is considered on its own merits. The ability to secure a different or an alternative status, I think that does rest with the members, if I'm right, yeah?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I would be happy to go away and clarify that position. We could defer it to the next panel, for example, just for a decision in relation, if you were leaning towards the bridleway status, that is something that I can go away and clarify in relation to making that decision.
Can I suggest as chair that we take that on board, and it's for members to decide what they want to do on that one. I've got David Smith first and then Paul Snape.
Chairman, I suddenly start seeing, as a retired magistrate, red lights starting to flash. I'm concerned that we as a panel, because we are a quasi-legal panel with legal powers, that we must not consider the strength of evidence that's not been presented, but just that there is additional evidence which we have not considered that however good it might be or not be, we can't prejudge that. And therefore, I don't think the panel can make a decision today until we have considered however weak that evidence may or may not be. I don't think that we can make a decision on something, and I think that we should, possibly you suggest, Chairman, defer it until the next meeting. We've already considered part of the evidence that you presented, in fact probably the major part of it, so it wouldn't be an extremely difficult job to just quickly recap on the evidence that we have already consider the additional evidence and to make a decision. But I think that it leaves us open as a panel to have not fully exposed all of the evidence, and I feel uncomfortable about that. Chairman.
Could I just ask therefore, is that a proposal for a deferment?
I would propose deferment, Chairman.
Thank you. On what Councillor Smith has just said, I said the exact opposite, I'm sorry. We're working on the balance of probabilities, the 51% rule. And we've got to look at the evidence that's been presented. And as David says, we don't consider what hasn't been presented. And if we look at the maps, the tithe map, the Ordnance Survey map, they're not there to show a designation, they show a line. I mean, the Ordnance Survey maps were basically introduced for the army and the military to go across land safely, and tithe maps before that. And if we look at what the strongest evidence really is the parish survey card of 1949, which actually states it's a footpath. So I really can't go along with the adjournment because I think really we've got to look at the evidence that's been presented today. And the evidence that's been presented today is that it's a footpath. And that's what I would be going with, I'm sorry.
Can I possibly interject as chair? I don't think there's a problem with the proposal in front of us. I think it's the two things for me as chair which make me feel quite a lot uncomfortable is that there's been a last-minute submission which needs clarification, and there's been a suggestion from officers we might want to upgrade it. And I think just taking it from the chair, that's how I see it. Paul, do you want to come back?
Having been on this panel for the last 4 years, you'll get used to overnight submissions. They're a regular thing for these people. They come in for that very purpose. Mr. Ray and other people do it on a regular basis, really, to try and keep things going. And I look really at the work we're trying to do, the backlog of everything. I think we've got to take the whole situation into consideration. You are the chair, and I will go with the majority decision. If we do adjourn, we can still make whatever decision we feel in the future. And if you feel it's the safest way, then I'll go along with it. But just to consider that as well, please.
Yeah. Could I ask you, Paul, with your knowledge, your thoughts on the proposal of a bridle way?
Keeping horses, I love having bridleways. It's great to go there. It also opens it, widens it up. But it's also, if it's the side of a farmer's field, it's going to take 3 metres off the farmer's field when they're planting, and you're looking at that as well. So, in hindsight, it may be best to adjourn it, but we don't need a full discussion next time. We just need to put it through and go along that way. So, if you feel for the integrity of this committee, that's the best way to go, I'll gladly go it that way.
Do you want to say anything, Councillor? Yeah. As chair, I would feel much more comfortable with it being deferred to the next meeting. We don't need a 15, 20, 30-minute submission. We just need the facts in front of us so that we can make a clear, safe decision.
Yeah, obviously it's a decision for yourselves. I think we just need to be very clear that the adjournment wouldn't be for the purposes of the applicant submitting further evidence. I mean, like I say, this piece of evidence was submitted at 10:20 last night, and obviously it was received this morning, so it isn't for the purposes of more evidence being submitted for the applicant.
Yeah, can I therefore clarify it and say the feeling of the committee, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we want to defer it, not to allow more evidence to be put forwards, but to have some clarity around the suggestion that this is upgraded to a bridle way. I personally feel that that is possibly the sensible thing to do, but there's not enough evidence for me as chair to feel it's safe for this committee to make a decision. So we've got a proposal to defer, a second there, and unanimous that we do that. And as I say, we don't need war and peace next time. Let's just have it nice and simple. Thank you. And thank you for your presentation, as usual. We'll now move on to item, I've lost my front sheet here. Item 7, are we on? It's the exclusion of the public. Could you possibly pass me the wording of somewhere in this multitude of papers? I've put my front sheet out of the way. Yes. Thank you. Okay. In terms of item number 7, exclusion of the public, I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraph of Part 1 of Schedule 12A, as amended, of the Local Government Act 1972, indicated below. I should really know that, shouldn't I? Thank you. And we'll wait for the nod that we're off air.